I'm Stephanie Ferrugia with Functional Movement Systems, and today I have the pleasure of sitting down with one of our co-founders who needs little introduction, Gray Cook. Now, there's been a lot going on behind the scenes here at Functional Movement headquarters, and who better than to talk about that than Gray himself. So Gray, are you ready to get started?
Yeah.
So tell us, what is about to come out to the Move Well, Move Often tribe?
Well, Lee challenged me and our entire production staff to get in the studio and talk about movement and function and not mention the FMS or the SFMA or any of the ways that we've used to try to standardize movement, to simply talk about the need for a functional appraisal without going into our particular brand or anybody else's. And I think the first thing I want people to know is if we dial the world back 300 to 400 years, there was no need for a functional appraisal because simply trying to survive and live and do things, we had to be more multifaceted. All of us had to walk more, had to climb more, had to bend, lift, turn, twist. We had to do things. So going back a few hundred years and talking about function wasn't relevant. But in a sedentary, industrialized culture that is sort of seeking convenience, and then when they find themselves in a problem, they want to hack their way back as quick as possible. You know, we never had a problem when we didn't have processed food. Now we have processed food, so we have to say, don't do so much of that. Well, when we see exercises that don't really create function, when we see myopic approaches to fitness that don't really create function, we don't want the public to think consuming that is the same as consuming this. So we know people on real whole food diets, they don't have everything perfect, but we don't have to remove all the processed food. Right now, we sit too much. That's processed movement. We pick one activity and do the heck out of it. That's processed movement. So what happens when we go back and look at people simply from a functional baseline, we find all these problems. Well, when we find all these problems, we got to fix them right away. Actually, you can almost fix your function by deleting certain behaviors than by adding certain behaviors. And so we went up in the studio and we looked sort of historically at function. And we also realized that most of our best, most enthusiastic people in the functional movement tribe, if they were given a chance to talk for 15 minutes at a conference in their region, more of them would show the FMS and tell them how to do it and what it is than they would say why it's needed. If I had 15 minutes, I wouldn't even show you the screen. I would say, here's why a functional screen is important. And learning to talk that way, if people knew how hard that was for our production staff and me to talk about movement without the specific FMS model, then they would actually see, oh, this is good. This is the elevator speech. This is the way I would talk to a general, a CEO, a football coach. I would demonstrate the why statement, and then when they leaned in, I would show them how we do it and what that yields.
So, well, who is this for then? Who's going to benefit the most from this message?
So I think for everybody who thinks they got this model down, learning how to talk about it without going right to the metric or this is how we do it is very empowering. And so I would challenge the best of us, our instructors first and the people who really practice and talk about our model a lot. Try talking about it this way. It's the best mental, physical exercise you could ever do. Is you don't have to hug a brand to embrace a concept.
One thing that you really dive into is you outline the basic layers or levels, as you call them, of movement. And then you talk about the two elements of movement and movement function, postures and patterns. Tell us, in that simplified, distilled down Gray Cook, version, what does that mean?
The two elements in function are things we commonly use these words, but we don't go deep. Postures and patterns. Postures are positions that we find ourselves in from horizontal to vertical, and what your spine and core have to do to make that possible. And patterns are literally how we manipulate objects, we pick up things and carry them around, or how we move ourselves, locomotion. So if you think about it, there are key postures to human function. And the way we get from one posture to another usually involves a few patterns. Once we're standing, we have basic patterns of locomotion and manipulation, and many people don't even do those right, but they're like, can you show me a kettlebell swing? Many people in our current culture, because of the internet and convenience we have far more access to a fitness appraisal than a functional appraisal. And so when we were in the infancy of our company saying, who do we give the functional screen to? Is that a healthcare thing? Is that a fitness thing? It's an everybody thing. It is a responsible endeavor before we were to pull you into our PE class or our boot camp. I think if we're really going to try to change the way you move and make you aware, more self-aware of your movement, we need a baseline up front, which is how we know who you are. But the second baseline is how we know how much we've helped you. So many people look at that second movement screen and wonder what's working. We don't. Before we start you on an exercise path, we have quick feedback that your leg raise is getting better, your shoulder mobility is getting better. So our confidence goes up in that this is the movement nutrient you need to consume as you become functional. It doesn't mean you got to put down your fitness, only the fitness that's counterproductive to you reclaiming the movement you lost.
So you've shown us the common sense approach to finding movement dysfunction or function. What is the common sense approach to fixing it?
Once we uncover a movement problem, long before I want to assign you an exercise, I want you to have an experience. I want you to experience something you're probably not aware of. I want you to remember that movement and breath are connected like that. And I want you to come out of that awareness and breathing drill with one little chance to resample your control. Now, you will do a sequence of things, and we call it a little recipe. And it's something every one of us who's been in movement for a while does automatically, but we've never talked about a movement correction as 3 separate stations. So 10 years ago, if I had a killer corrective and somebody said, what is better, to do 3 different correctives or 3 sets of your one killer corrective? I was like, do my exercise 3 times. Now what I'm seeing in human movement learning and reclamation of a movement pattern, if I give you the same task in 3 different postures and in 3 different patterns, your central nervous goes, whoa, this is important because I'm getting this same message 3 different ways. And the reason we know that is true is because when we come out of that very first attempt to change your movement, I already know what screen test sent me here. Your push-up, your leg raise, your shoulder mobility. I don't go a week without feedback, nor do I make you go through another 10-minute movement screen. I go right to push-up or shoulder mobility, and you've had some time to do these drills. You get to see if it changed, and I get to see if it changed. But the reason I know it changed and the reason you feel it changed may be different. This gives us an opportunity to reconcile that language, because you're like, I just don't feel my back being tight anymore. I know you're using your hamstrings and core differently. I don't have to tell you that. As long as you know those 3 things make your back work better, do you really want to be a PhD in exercise science, or you just want to touch your toes and be able to retrieve the putt when you get one in the hole? So that's where I think educating our clients, athletes, and patients isn't about reading them the FMS scroll or all these things. It's simply about giving them a beneficial movement experience against a baseline that I set, but also a feeling that I gave you a chance to have, and then I took that feeling away and replaced it with what feels like a lot better balance or a lot better flexibility. You almost don't know how you got there, but you know the 3 steps to get there again. And that's what we've come to, is I honestly didn't want people to walk away from FMS saying, we know the only exercises you should do. The very first thing we did is set up a baseline of how quick can we change movement, what exercises are good at this pattern, what exercises are good at that pattern. I don't want to debate anybody on exercise. Why should we? Because as long as we got a stopwatch, we don't have to debate who's the fastest. But until we get that stopwatch, we have to have a lot of races and do a lot of things. It's more simple than that. The feedback loop of the movement screen is to reflect on the intervention you just made. 80% of the time, you should have a measurable that says you did the right thing. And if you did, even if the client, patient or athlete doesn't feel there was a change, you've got the data right here. There was a change. Well, you know, I do feel a little bit different, and that's where it all starts. It's getting them on board during the process, not just telling them what's wrong and you should go do this.
Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and explain to us about common sense to evaluating and correcting movement. We look forward to sharing that with the Move Well, Move Often community.